tell us about your early years, how your career progressed from law to investing. Do you still feel that all lawyers want to stop being lawyers? As you told me 30 years ago.
Yeah, so the early years, I guess it started, and I was born and raised in St. Louis and went to Duke University. It was my undergraduate school. Always wanted to be a lawyer when I was growing up. So when I graduated from Duke, I went straight away to University of Virginia Law School, where I was very fortunate to meet my wife, Martha, who now I've been married to her for 36 years. Mm-hmm. But I had a lot of twists and turns along the way. I was offered a clerkship for then Judge, now Justice Kennedy, when he sat on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals out in California. I accepted that clerkship, and based on leaving Martha 3,000 miles away, I decided I didn't want to take that risk. I was risk averse back then, particularly about such things, so I asked her to marry me, and she came out with me to California. I clerked for a year. We had intended to come back to the East Coast to practice law, but once you go out to California, it's pretty nice out there. And we decided, well, let's stay here for a couple years and practice, and we can always go back to the East Coast. Judge Kennedy, who I'm pretty close to even now, encouraged me to come down to Los Angeles. He was in the Northern California area, and this was before Silicon Valley, and he said, well, you know, he used to give me all the business cases, and he says now that he even knew then that I was very interested and inclined in that direction, and he said, you should go down to Los Angeles and practice law. It's very vibrant. You practice law for a couple years and you never know what will happen to you. And sure, and he suggested a firm that I go to, which was O'Melveny Myers, big law firm in Los Angeles. And I went down there with my wife. We started practicing at O'Melveny, and 3.5 years later, I got a call from a guy named Eli Broad, who was interested, had heard about me from a very close friend of his, a guy named Dick Reardon, who was ultimately mayor of Los Angeles for a couple terms. And Eli wanted me to interview to be his general counsel of his big company. He had an insurance company and the largest home builder in California, and it was very well known in the Southern California area. I was in my 20s, but I figured it's worth meeting Eli Broad, even though I thought it was kind of a long shot for someone in their 20s to be general counsel of this big company. He didn't have my resume, he just heard about me from Reardon, and I went into the interview with him, and I told Howard the story before. 15 minutes into the interview, he starts describing a position where you know, I should get out of law and be his assistant and help him with investments and mergers and acquisitions, and he asked me, you know, how much I was being paid at O'Melveny. He said he'd pay me 50% more, and you know, the only catch was he was a pretty difficult guy to work for, but I figured it was worth a shot. So that's how I got out of law.
I see.
It was kind of coincidental.
And working for Eli at Sun America, you quickly made your first investments in distressed debt. And what took you in that direction? And you know, it was an unusual field at the time.
Very unusual. Eli had made through the insurance companies, had gotten involved in a company called Johns Manville, which was a Dow 30 stock that had ultimately fallen into bankruptcy because of asbestos liabilities. And he gave me the file and said, hey, you're a lawyer, figure this out. And it was intriguing to me because there were bonds trading at discounts and the stock was really like an option. And I came back to him and I said, well, I'd hold the stock and I'd buy the bonds. And we ultimately did, and I thought it was just a fascinating area. No one really was doing much of it. Ultimately, I ran into two of the real pioneers, Randy Smith and Basil Vassiliou, who were raising the very, very, very first fund that I'd ever heard of, or anyone had heard of. And they were trying to raise $40 million. We passed on it, but it was something that always stuck in my mind, that this is a really cool thing and something that you know, people should think about. The other thing that was going on, as you recall, Howard, is that in the 80s you had the LBO craze. And one of the things that we were doing at Sun America is we were financing these LBOs. So I was seeing over time, real time, how prices were getting higher and higher, and assumptions getting greater and greater about growth and EBITDA, and the leverage that was being put was greater and greater on the companies. And so it would all kind of said to me, gee, maybe distressed securities at some point could end up being a really interesting field, particularly if we ever have a recession. Now, that was a matter of debate back then, as you recall.
Well, at that time, one thing we're both very attentive to is cycles. And where you are in the cycle really has a great deal to do with what you should be doing at a point in time. But the interesting thing about cycles is after the things have been going well for 6, 8, 10 years, everybody says, well, maybe we won't ever have another cycle. Maybe this has been fixed, and wouldn't it be great if we never had a recession again? But then what are you guys in distressed debt ever going to do to keep busy?
Right. Well, that was when I basically I approached Howard with this idea. Howard was a huge figure even back then. That was 30 years ago in the bond management world, and high yield in particular. He was one of the pioneers, and I thought it would be great to marry this distressed idea with one of the leading high yield bond businesses, certainly in the United States and clearly in the Western United States. And so I sort of called him up out of the blue, and he said, yeah, let's get together for lunch. We had lunch in Brentwood somewhere. I don't know where you took me, but I made my pitch, and you bought it. So I guess my question to you is, what made you? I had done a little bit of this with Eli, and I had sort of an idea, and I think my pitch was, hey, there are a lot of legal issues involved with bankruptcy distress, bankruptcy investing, and I'm a lawyer, and there aren't many people like me who've had a legal background and also some investing experience, albeit not all that much. And I made my pitch, so why did you buy it?
Well, I think that, having started Citibank's high yield bond fund in 1978, which was really the beginning of that world, I had some experience going into a field that most people said, what, are you crazy? And they called them junk bonds. And Moody's said they were not a desirable investment. And most investing organizations had a written rule against non-investment grade investing. So I saw the benefits of doing something unconventional. And if you think about it for a minute, doing the things that everybody else wants to do, it's hard to think you're going to find a particular bargain. Doing the things that everybody else fails to see the wisdom of, you have a better chance of getting a bargain or running off the cliff. So that was number one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then number two, since I had been in the high yield bond business for 9 years by the time you and I connected, every once in a while in that period, we're not perfect. You buy a bond at 100, it goes bankrupt, it falls to 10. You go on the creditor committee, you work it out, you spend a few years of drudgery, and you get 30. So it wasn't a great leap of faith for me to say, well, why don't we start a fund to do the 10 to 30 part? And that's really what it was conceived as. And
then when he hired me, this was in '87, I was supposed to come up with the business plan, which I did. And by the way, the business plan, as you recall, was that. We were going to look at basically high yield subordinated bonds, watch them drop from 100 down to 10, and then enjoy the ride up. Don't buy them until they get down to 10, but then enjoy the ride up. We ultimately, as we got into it, I started doing some different things. In particular, I learned the joys and learned to love bank debt and the seniority and the control that it provided in the bankruptcy.